chosen the silent path.
Mm.
You guys are about ready?
Yep.
Right. So I'm gonna stop the video for now. You get to see me.
Mm.
And I'll try CJ to get the camera rolling. Kathy's coming in, it looks like.
Yeah.
Anything else?
Well, I'll leave it up to you. You can focus now, or should we, if you want to start and let Kathy kind of catch up, I can try and pull behind the scenes.
So, are you recording, or this is recorded, David?
But I will be, if you guys are ready, I can get that rolling.
Yeah, why don't we go ahead then, and if you've got it recorded, we can get started,
Okay, so give me about 30 seconds.
okay?
Okay, it's on record.
All right, thank you very much. Let's call to order this work session of the city of Lincoln City on March 30th, 2020. And a reminder that this is a work session, so no decisions can be made in this session. But we can certainly have a lot of discussion. So could we do a roll call for the record? And how do we do this? We could go around the list.
Dick, why don't you call the names?
All right. Councilor Coos?
Here.
Councilor Hinton?
Here.
Councilor Casper?
Here.
Councilor Mark?
Here?
Councilor Parsons?
Parsons?
Mitch, that's you.
Sorry, you broke out there. I'm here.
All right. Councilor Holden?
Here.
All right. And we also have Jody, who's here from Urban Renewal, and Allison,
Hello.
and Don Chandler, and let's see who else we have. We have Richard Epcello's on the line, and Kathy's sitting in the background. I guess Kathy's here. So, Jody, is this your show or Allison's?
Yeah, this, I can go ahead and pull up the PowerPoint we're going to look at today that I sent out on Friday. So I'm going to share my screen, so your screens are going to be a little wonky for a second. Okay, can you all see that?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. And it may be helpful on the side to hide the thumbnail video so that it's not blocking the text that's showing on the PowerPoint.
How do we do that?
Hit
the minus button.
Nope, that didn't work.
Oh, that's right.
I need help. I'm lost.
I see view options at the top, and it gives a show video panel or hide video panel. I can see the text.
I can see it.
I can see.
Hi.
Okay. So what we're talking about today is the Economic Development Toolbox. And this is a work session, so we're not bringing to you any programs to approve. We're not asking for any funding right now. We really just want to have a discussion about the economic development tools that we are going to be developing and trying to decide what is that criteria going to look like and who are these tools really going to be developed for, whether that's businesses or residential tools. So how we've structured this work session is we have 12 like big tools or big questions we want to work through to develop criteria for economic development tools. And so for each question, we're going to pose the question to you, and then we'll present a list of options that different ways that we could define or figure out how to answer that question. And for each of those options, we've bolded the option number that staff would recommend. So we're going to work through those 12 questions, and hopefully by the end of this work session, we'll get a better understanding of how to develop future tools that we'll bring back to City Council and Urban Renewal Agency in future meetings to approve those tools, to bring them online. So we'll do that first, and then next we will bring back the proposal from BAMA that was brought to the Urban Renewal Agency on January 27th. And at that time, Urban Renewal had asked for future discussion in a work session, so we'll talk about that and decide how to respond to that proposal. And then last, we'll talk about the next steps and the timeline for future tools to be brought online. And that will really be dependent on how the 12 questions are answered. So that's really our goal, is to get pretty clear answers from you all on how to develop the criteria for these tools. So do you have any questions before we jump in about how we want this meeting to flow?
Hearing none.
Okay, so jumping right into question number 1. Let's see. What types of businesses or entities should economic development funding be prioritized for? So different options. Number 1, and this is what has been used in the past for the existing urban renewal economic development tools, is to make funding available on a first come, first served basis. And this is staff's recommendation. Number 1, because this is what's been used before. And number 2, there really hasn't been a huge influx of interest in the existing tools. And so making the funding available first come, first served really prioritizes the funds for businesses or entities that are actually going to use that tool. So that's what staff would recommend. Option number 2 would be to prioritize entities that support existing business community and are not in competition with existing businesses. And one way to tackle deciding if an entity is going to do that would be to develop a scoring guide that the Urban Renewal or City Council Loan and Grant Committee could use as an application for a tool comes in. They could look at that and decide how well is that program or project going to support the existing businesses. And then similar to that would be option 3, prioritize funding for businesses and organizations that support city and urban renewal economic development and housing goals. And we could develop a similar scoring guide. Rather than looking at just supporting the businesses, it would support overall goals for economic development and housing. And that could be, the scoring guide could be developed. I can share an example from Bonita, what they use for their urban renewals toolkit, kind of. They have a really in-depth scoring guide that they use. And then another option would be to either limit or don't limit funding to tax-exempt entities. So this time, it would be nice to have a discussion about going back to the question, what businesses should these tools be prioritized for?
Jody, this is Deanna. I'm just curious. I think in your slides, don't you have something from Vanita? So we could look at that first. Thank you.
Yes. Yeah. And this is just an example. They have a pretty extensive, I didn't want to include the whole thing in the slide, but for the tools, this is one example of how they've prioritized or how they've set it up so that staff or their agency can really decide how to prioritize funding. And this is obviously something, if City Council and Urban Renewal Agency want to use a tool like this, we would need more direction on what elements what exactly are we looking for who's being prioritized, and what are the overall goals for economic development?
So I have two thoughts. And one, this is back to the logistics. When we did our training session the other day, and on my screen, if I look at the bottom, there's an option to click on where it says participants. If you can see that. And then that gives you a button to push that says raise hand. And if I click that, I think you see a hand on my video screen. Mm-hmm. And that's a method for letting Dick or Alice or whoever is moderating to recognize someone that wants to say something. So that might help us if you want to do that. But my other thought on this question is, personally, I'm content with the status. It sounds like the status quo is working. So why don't we just continue on the first come, first served basis unless we reach a point where we're getting such demand that it becomes an issue and we might need to change that. Can we just proceed like that?
Yeah, and that's what staff would recommend, is to stick with what we've done, and then in the future, if more tools come online, and there's an influx of interest, and we need to reevaluate, moving to a different option could be possible, but for the time being, staff would recommend first come, first served.
So, Jody, I'm wondering, you use the plural in tools, and I'm thinking another tool is funding. By virtue of the amount of funding in a tool, kind of dictates whether it's available or not. So can you remind us, is that how this will work? And I'm thinking going forward, who knows about our availability to actually put money into these tools, but would it be like a general tool fund, and then we allocate to respective or individual actual tools? Does that make sense? I'm not so much worried about, I like the first come, first serve, and that's an easy one. And then we, by virtue of funding a individual tool, make that active.
Right now, because we're just getting the toolbox started, we really just have one bucket of funding in economic development for all of the tools. And then as the tools come online, first come, first serve is how we have been figuring that we would proceed. And Jody's right, and Councillor Mark mentioned, if there gets to be a lot of demand on one tool over another, or we just have, one application for every tool, then if we feel like there's, how do I describe this? I think it's going to be unlikely that we end up with 5 or 20 applications in one budget year for one tool, just based on how we have been working with the toolbox over time. We have 1 or 2 applications a year. I think at the most we've had 4, and they've been facade improvement loan and maybe an energy efficiency loan. So we haven't had a lot of demand, and we don't have a very big city. So trying to make sure that we're not spending too much time creating complicated criteria for all these programs, but setting them up for success so that we're clear on what the objectives are and outcomes for people and what kind of assistance is really needed in our city is kind of the balance of the sweet spot. So, we don't want to, again, make things too complicated, but we want to make sure that we're getting the right outcomes that you want.
My hand's up.
I saw that.
I just want to say that I agree with that because we don't have a big city. We don't have a large demand on any tool. But when and if we do, if we could go to the Veneta slide, Jody, I just wanted to point out a couple things that I thought would be good. I like number 3 because, especially for urban renewal, and as we are trying to follow what urban renewal is in place to do with blight and encouraging development and all of those things, those goals, I think number 3 is a good one. Like I say, when we get to a point when if we have competition. I also like number 4. All of us, well, not right now during the coronavirus situation we're living in, but otherwise people are going to Salem for Costco trips and all those other kinds of things, maybe going to other cities. So if there was something to encourage fewer of those trips, that might be good too. I also actually really like number 8. Creates family wage jobs, and I think that should be an underlying goal, if at all possible, that we that whatever our funding goes towards, that it helps to encourage job growth here. And I would include one more, that if we do look at job creation, family wage job creation, that we limit it to the boundary of the school, of our school district. That's all.
So I had a thought, which is, like I said before, first come, first serve is working now, and we're not anticipating it to be a problem in the future. That's fine, but what if, do we need to have some sort of safeguard in place so that if suddenly we got 3 applications in 1 week and we really needed to pick and choose, and we like number 3 a lot, and number 2 sort of, and we really don't like number 1, are we in a position where we're obliged to give to number 1 because they were first come, first served? That's my question.
Yeah, that's a good question. How the tools are structured now, there's language in there that says that funds, or the approval is dependent on funds available, and really is the final decision is up to either the city council or urban renewal agency, depending on if that's the city or urban renewal tool. So there's no obligation to approve any tool. If an agency receives an application that isn't going to further the goals of the agency, then there's no requirement that you approve that. That really is up to city council and urban renewal.
That's the answer.
Diane, you had a question?
I do. Okay, so part of me, it's a thought, not a question, but a thought in a sense that even on a first come, first serve, I like having a scoring guide so that there can't be any biases. Either they got the 30 points or they did not. Whether it's one person, the first person, it just leaves for less question on, oh, well, you liked them, that's why you gave it to them. They are following the guidelines. That's my thought.
Could I go back to, and maybe just correct Allison, Deanna's comments and stuff, and I guess what the question I would have is the area has to be in the city limits. So if we're talking of an economic toolkit for using the city, Deanna's comment of the Taft School District kind of boundary would not apply. It has to be in the city of Lincoln City.
Yeah, technically we can only spend money within the city limits. I think I understand though what you're trying to get toward, Councilor Hinton, and you know, it's challenging because we're such a small county. People live and work all throughout the county, including Lincoln City. And so we are in the same labor shed, we're in the same housing shed. I mean, there could be something, you know, Jody and I can brainstorm with Mr. Chandler about, as we get down the road with creating the criteria for different tools, maybe we have some kind of a job-specific fund that allows the opportunity to partner with the county, where the county sees some job benefit, and it's not in Lincoln City, that we could then, you know, pool our money in order to have an impact, but not be the only funding provider, whether it be a loan or a grant. So I think there's a way that we can still maintain support when it's outside Lincoln City. But for this toolbox, it is for things that are happening within Lincoln City.
Okay with me.
So what's the possibility of, you know, a first come, first served, but to Diane's suggestion of incorporating also a short scoring list or criteria?
Yeah, the program criteria, I think there's program criteria and then there's a scoring guide. Really the way that we've been doing it so far is staff takes a look at the application, and really we visit with the prospective applicant before we even get an application, so that the applicant understands what the goals are of that program, so that when they give us the application, they know that they're either going to meet those goals or not, in which case it wouldn't really behoove them to apply. So I think that there are, you know, that's the whole point of this work session, is to go through these questions and try to help figure out what you want to have in the criteria of each program. And then, you know, a scoring guide is definitely something we can do if we find ourselves in a competitive situation where we end up with, you know, several applications for one type of program. But if there's something like, you know, one of those or two of those bullet points in the Veneta scoring guide example, we could just put those into the criteria. And then we know that the applicant is, you know, driving their project to meet that set of criteria. If it doesn't meet it, then they don't qualify. It could also be that you use language like require or recommend or highly recommend or suggest. You know, there are lots of words that we can use when we're doing the criteria, so that we're not creating too strict of a requirement that we don't get any applications or have any successful applications. But we're also, you know, making sure that people understand what we're trying to achieve with the programs.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
So for me, the most important thing that will come out of all of this is what your priorities are. For example, if it is job creation, then that becomes listed as the top priority. And then the next question is a job, or is it certain types of jobs that you're interested in? If it's diversity, if it's retail versus non-retail, if it's manufacturing versus something else, those, as Allison and Jody have been going through these, those to me become the most important criteria so that we're actually going down a road you guys want to go to and accomplish what you guys hope to accomplish.
So I since we're not coming to any conclusions, but I'm wondering as we go through these 12 questions, maybe things would get flushed out, and I'm sensing a kind of a combination of first come, first served right now, but with a footnote knowing we need some kind of provide some kind of direction as Ron has indicated, then maybe that will come as we keep answering the questions.
Can I ask, how does this tie into the Small Business Administration and like the things that they're doing with everything kind of changing? Will they overlap with what the small business loan will be doing, immediately, so I don't know how that section will help with that. A lot of businesses are looking for help, and will this come into play with the immediate future?
Yeah, that's a good question. We have given the list of tools to the Small Business Development Center, and I think I know we're in a challenging situation with COVID-19 going on. That's kind of adding a layer of complexity to and urgency to funding tools in general. For the most part, what we have done is 0% interest loans or grants. I'm pretty sure that there aren't any other tools that are 0% interest loans. There may be grants, but they're probably very specific to different employer types. And I don't know that those are tourism oriented. I think they're food and beverage mostly, but they're for manufacturing or production rather than retail, direct consumer food and beverage type things like restaurants. So I'm not aware of where we are overlapping. I think we are, butting up to other programs that are available. And we do work closely with Small Business Development Center, as I know you know, where if a business is really set up, they've got their business plan, they know where they're going, they just have kind of a gap in getting to the next point with, the state of the building and needing repair and stuff like that. So I think that every tool that we've talked about does not replicate what's in existence. And so where people can take advantage of a 0% loan, that our program would be more competitive than something through the COG, for example, because they also do small business lending.
Yeah, I think a lot of business owners might be looking at the economic development toolkit as a way to transition through this. And so just trying to clarify, really have where they separate and what you'll be able to use the funds for, any of that stuff. I think it's important to establish now that, hey, yes, there are tools, but these are over here and this is over here. So just looking for further definition. Yeah, thanks.
Well, and I think in this case, there may be businesses that were ready to do some capital improvements on a building, and they may decide that doing a 0% interest loan rather than paying cash is a better sort of way for them to still do their improvements, but use their available cash or credit for something else that is more needed in order to stay operational through this time.
Yeah, that makes sense. Cool.
All right. Shall we move on to the next question?
Yes, let's go ahead and move on. And it sounds like for now, option one sounds like the consensus, but we can revisit this as we go through the actual criteria. Okay, the question two, and Allison kind of alluded to this, we have in the past used 0% interest rates for the loan programs. So for future tools, what interest rate should we use? So option one would be to continue to use that 0% interest rate on loans. And this is staff's recommendation. Again, this is what we've done in the past. And there's also a concern if we increase an interest rate, we're going to lose interest in these programs. That's what businesses are interested in, is that 0% interest rate. Option two would be to begin charging a low interest rate, either maybe 1% or 2% interest rate, and work with OCOG to administer the loans and send the appropriate forms as directed. For example, there's a requirement to file with the IRS on all interest payments over $500. And so we could contract with the COG to really administer those funds soup to nuts, as Allison says. And then the third option would be to charge a low interest rate, and the city would administer those funds and send appropriate forms as needed. And this would put a lot of more work administratively on the city. And so staff recommends, again, staying with the 0% interest rate and acknowledging that this would have a hole in the bucket, and as administrative fees are applied. But we want to make these tools usable. We want people to actually be interested in them and take advantage of them.
Councilor Casper.
Yeah, you mentioned the fees. How much do the fees amount to? Approximately. Is there a percentage or a rate, or, but there are fees you mentioned. That was my question. Are there fees, and what range?
Right now, the fees are charged or rolled in with the loan. So the applicant pays all the loan processing and closing fees. So there is a cost to them in order to get this 0% interest. What we are, we just had our first loan go through with the COG. So I don't have an amount on how much it costs them to basically get that loan to a point of approval. So, you know, we do pay them an hourly rate. It does have a cost per year. And as we have more and more loans, that cost will go up for servicing. So I can definitely get you clearer answers on that in the future. We basically have just transferred all the loans. In 2018, we started working with COG. And so we transferred all the loan servicing over. And again, it was just late last year that we had our first application. So I can look that up and get back to you on that.
Okay, thank you.
So I like the idea of zero interest rate, simply because this whole idea of the toolkit is to be an incentive and assist and partner. I do think we have to be mindful of covering our costs, and if we have costs associated with the servicing of these loans, we need to have that paid for. But I think in seriousness, we're a patient investor, patient lender, so you know as long as we're getting back our principal, and that depending on the term, we can use it again and not dissolve our fund pool, so to speak. But I'm certainly for a zero interest loan. Other thoughts? Deanna?
Yeah, I would, Judy asked a question that I had, and I would just like to say that if there's, and Allison doesn't know yet because we don't quite have all the experience we need of identifying what the cost per loan is for staff time and just to cover the cost of it. But if there's, I think after we have some more experience and have some numbers, we should revisit this. I also think that the 0% rate is really good, but I also think we need to recuperate our costs too. And if it's rolled into the loan, and so the cost of that isn't increased by a higher interest rate, then that would also be good. But I just think we need more information to be able to answer long-term how we address this.
Judy, I know you're still on, your hand is up. Did your question get answered?
Oh, no, but my hand is going down here.
Okay.
Wait, I have just a thought. So,
Rick, let me have, was that you, Judy?
yeah?
Either way.
All right.
I bet Rick wants to.
I really, Deanna really just kind of said, well, I'm just agreeing. And it sounds like Allison says the costs are covered. So it doesn't really seem to be an issue, and 0% is attractive and an incentive. And so let's stick with what we got. But as long as we're paying attention to the costs and know that they actually are covered, then we don't have a problem. That's what I got.
The costs are covered in terms of the underwriting go into the loan. There are costs that we pay to the COG. For example, if there needs to be more time invested, like if someone's doing a refinance, then usually the loan just gets paid off. There are some cases where a loan can cost more than another loan, like the business loans are more expensive than the real property loans. Again, we haven't done any business loans, but if we are to do one, those are more time intensive for looking up the financial information, the profit and loss statements, and building the loan to have the sufficient collateral when there is not real property involved can be more expensive of a loan to set up. So I don't want you to think that all the costs are on the borrower. There are some costs that are additional. I think it's a $12 per month electronic service fee that goes along with every payment. So, and that's not to us, that's to the applicant. So I will find out more information about how much it actually costs to do a loan. But there is a leak in the bucket in terms of the cost that the city pays in order to have the loan program. So what is that cost? I know in the first year, 2018-19, it was more significant than usual because we had to transfer our existing loans over to this new loan processor. And I can't say enough about working with the COG. They have experience. They have other programs as well. So if an applicant is interested in one of our programs, but it's not quite the right fit, or they want to take advantage of two programs, ours and another one that does pay an interest rate, the COG is really set up just like a bank would be to help combine funds in order to make a project more possible. So there are advantages to working with the COG besides just our loan processing.
Rick, go ahead.
So it is, while we're waiting for these loans to be applied for and the money handed out, do we have does the Urban Renewal District have a pool of money sitting in an account somewhere? Is it earning interest?
Yes, it is.
Okay, that's it.
Okay. Judy, you have a question?
Yeah, so if we figure out what the fees are and we've had to transfer over to COG, would it be interesting to compare what the percentage of these fees actually were and compare it to a low interest rate, say like 1%, and then let COG administer the loans like in number 2? used?
Sure. So I think the real question is what is the cost for one loan? And we're working on getting that. I think at this point, to me, it sounds like you all want to continue with 0% interest rate until and unless you have information about how big a leak in the bucket is there. And again, we've worked with the Urban Renewal Agency budget, which basically, transfers over every year. When we first set up this facade improvement loan program, I think it was 1.2 million of the 43 million of the urban renewal money that created this revolving loan fund. In the case of the city's toolbox, it'll work differently in that there's an annual budget allocation that you all will decide competitively with all the other departments and programs. And that will be the limit to the funding for that year. And without knowing what the interest or the word interest is always a challenge because we're talking about interest rates. But until we know what our local businesses and property owners are really wanting to take advantage of with programs, we don't really know how much money. So it's kind of a cart and horse sort of thing with budgeting for this sort of a program.
Does that answer your question, Judy? All right. Well, I think you've captured it, Allison and Judy, on zero interest rate, but let's gauge the size of the leak.
Okay. If I can just mention one more thing on interest rates, it could also be that, I like to think that we're going to have a lot of interest, we're going to have a lot of demand on programs, and we're going to have a lot of success. However, if we end up with, let's say, everybody interested in a childcare loan or a loan to do an accessory dwelling unit, then we could either create an interest rate or reduce an interest rate in order to try to create some demand with a program. I know City of Portland at one time was offering loans or grants, and they said for 6 months, we're going to give a 0% interest rate, whereas normally they charged an interest rate. So it just might be that with different objectives or goals that you have, you might want to vary the interest rate in order to help get some excitement and demand and to get people to actually get their applications in the door. In that case, we would want to have a scoring guide because we would say within 6 months we'll accept applications, or 3 months or whatever, and we will be scoring these competitively, and we only have so much money to fund this sort of a program, and we'll select the first X number of thousands of dollars to go toward this effort. So there are a lot of ways that we can bring to you options to get your goals and objectives going. Again, we just don't know if we have enough of the size of a city of business owners and property owners to really make a program work in that way.
Judy, you had a question? Evidently not. Allison, I guess in the back of my mind, I am concerned that we aren't competing with the traditional lenders. And I guess, as you mentioned, in just talking about with ADUs, if the traditional lenders aren't making those loans or won't making those loans, great. But for us to be, inserting ourselves with zero interest rate public dollars, I'm a little concerned about that. So I think we have to be cognizant of back to our overall objectives and what we're trying to accomplish with these incentive type tools.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And again, that's something that can really be hashed out with the specific program criteria. And that's something that will be, for each program, we'll be bringing to City Council and Urban Renewal agencies separately. So through that process, you'll be able to direct staff whether or not a specific criteria is maybe not aligning with the goals or needs to be more developed. But yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, and in some cases, we may have a facade improvement loan that someone's been thinking about, and they may be working with their bank, commercial bank, but they just aren't convinced that they have the cash flow in order to make those payments over the term of that loan. But when our 0% interest rate becomes available to them, that they may decide that they are able to make that work, and that may create the impetus for them to move forward on their project more quickly than if it weren't 0% interest. So I know there's a fine line with competing with the lending community, and we definitely don't want to do that. We just want to make sure that we're creating incentives for people to do improvements and working with lenders. When a project exceeds what the borrowing capacity is for this program, then usually there's a commercial lender involved in addition to our funding.
Judy, you show your hand up. Are you looking for something? And you're on mute.
No, I was chasing my dog. Sorry.
You might take your hand down too.
Oh, is my hand up? No. Oh, sorry about that.
That's all right.
Okay, no, dog's fine.
Okay. All right. Jody, go ahead.
Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and move to question 3. Continuing on with the discussion about the loan programs, do we want to offer loan forgiveness? And if so, what are the circumstances that we would do, or not we, but what are the circumstances that City Council or Urban Renewal Agency would forgive a loan? Different options. Number 1 is do not offer loan forgiveness. That's pretty straightforward. Option 2 would be to offer loan forgiveness only on projects that are greater than 50% of the value, resulting in an increase to the tax base. Option 3 would be to offer loan forgiveness when a program is meeting the city and urban renewal agency goals. This could be all commercial tools or all residential tools. For example, if city and urban renewal agency prioritize housing and residential tools, they could offer loan forgiveness for that specific program. Option 4 would be to offer loan forgiveness when the project is meeting the program goals. So, for example, if the goal of the business expansion program is to create jobs, then offer loan forgiveness dependent on meeting that program goal of jobs created, or housing occupied for residential tools, and so on. And then the 5th option could be to offer loan forgiveness on a case-by-case basis for struggling businesses. For example, existing loans for businesses that may be struggling as a result of the current crisis. Do we want to offer loan forgiveness if those businesses need that? And so staff would recommend either option 3 or option 4. And that really goes back to City Council and Urban Renewal Agency having specific goals that need to be met through these tools and offering loan forgiveness for projects that are furthering those goals.
Thoughts? Deanna?
Hi. I really like the 2 that the staff have highlighted. I would also like to see the next slide for Albany's number 5. Or not number 5, it's just Albany's, City of Albany. offered a 5-year forgivable loan to encourage single-family housing development, 20% forgiven each year if residential property receiving funds was occupied. I'm not sure if I like that exactly the way it is or if we should consider it, but I would like to keep that in the mix just to help with our housing development.
Yeah, and this example wasn't to say this is a criteria Lincoln City should use, but this was City of Albany was trying to increase single-family housing development, and this was a tool that they have used in the past to do that. So we could use a similar structure.
So why wouldn't that fit under your fourth suggestion? Job creation or housing occupied or value increased, and be a negotiated tool. I hate I hate coming right out of the block and saying, we provide forgivable loans, but maybe we, as part of the incentive, do for example, those specific job creation or housing, and then negotiate it depending on the type of housing, the term, how, much like we're doing with the cultural center or other areas where the transitional housing, we're forgiving a loan because the community is getting a value added, but over extended period of time. Rick, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, am I unmuted here? The concept of forgivable loan makes me nervous. I find this revolving loan fund to be really appealing, and it just feels like, well, it just go on forever, and money keeps circulating, and we keep helping businesses out. But if you start offering loan forgiveness, then that pool of funds starts to dry up, and I'm not sure why we would do that, as opposed to, I don't know, if we're going to create a grant fund for businesses, that just feels like a whole other level of assistance and a commitment of taxpayer dollars, and I don't know that I'm ready to do that necessarily. But I don't know what the answer is. It just makes me nervous.
Yeah. Judy, you got a comment?
Yeah, on Rick's comment there, I think if we're focused on a project that will create jobs and housing, I think that's a lot more stable than just sort of willy-nilly. I mean, I think if we're focused on something, I think that's an additive aspect to the whole forgiveness program that we could control by whatever our projects are. That's my thought.
Yeah. And that would be perhaps something that the staff and loan committee, so to speak, would bring to the agency or council. Okay.
So am I right in hearing that there's concern about losing money when it can revolve out to other businesses or property owners? But at the same time, if there is a project that comes forward that meets specific council goals of jobs or housing or any other high priority goal, that it could be discussed, and that it could be discussed where it's not set up ahead of time about what percentage of a loan would be forgiven, when a loan would be forgiven. But if there were programs that were developed with criteria that mentioned the possibility of loan forgiveness in some cases where high community benefit is being met, or something, some kind of language like that, that you'd like to have it as an option in some cases. Is that right?
Yes.
I like that.
Rick?
Yeah, that makes sense. And I'm remembering that the Cultural Center came to us when we had funds available, and we were able to grant them a sizable chunk of money to help them with their current redevelopment program. But it's a case-by-case, decision. Mm-hmm. And as the mayor said, it makes to announce to the world that we have this loan forgiveness program is I don't know, that's something I want to do.
Okay, so if we were to bring back something that had language that was included but not highlighted, that it's an option, but it would be discussed on a case-by-case basis. Okay, yeah. Thank you.
Judy, are you okay?
Yeah, that's great.
Okay, you still have your hand up.
Oh, dang it. I'm not going to put my hand up anymore.
Okay.
Just talk.
All right.
There you go.
Thanks. All right.
Okay. So the next question is kind of similar, but going more into grant funding. And Councilor Mark kind of alluded to this a bit. Should the city or urban renewal agency offer grant funding? And if so, in what circumstances and for how much? So the urban renewal agency has used in the past the local program support grant as well as the downtown manager grant tool, which we'll talk about the second one at the end of these big questions. But one option is to continue to offer grant funding through that local program support grant, but do not offer additional grant funding through new economic development tools. And then option 2 would be to continue to offer grant funding through that local program support grant and offer additional grant funding through new tools. And that could be dependent on specific program criteria. Again, looking at jobs created, if that's a goal, and then that would kind of raise questions about, would this be for businesses? Would it be for nonprofits? And again, what would be the limit for these grant funds? And then option 3 would be to just don't offer any grant funding and limit economic incentives to the revolving loan funds. So staff's recommendation here would be to continue to offer grant funding through the local program support grant program, and I should say as well, potentially a downtown manager tool if City Council and Urban Renewal go in that direction. But then for the new economic development tools, do not offer additional grant funding and rather use the loans and potentially on a case-by-case basis, as we just discussed, loan forgiveness as needed, as a better leveraging point than just grant funding.
And Jody, under this program, the local program support, that's been where the education, business education scholarships have gone as well?
Correct. That's been used, I believe, seven years for the Small Business Development Center, and one award has gone to support local Lincoln County. Allison, you'll have to remind me on the specifics of that.
So it's been seven years for the Small Business Development Center, and yes, for business assistance scholarship. And that has been for people located within the Urban Renewal District boundary. Eventually, I think it would be preferable to Small Business Development Center, and staff supports this hopeful direction to have that grant, local program support grant, be available through the city so that the Small Business Development Center can then be offering scholarship business assistance citywide rather than be restricted to the urban renewal boundary. And yes, it's been, and then the other grant recipient was, I think, in year 1 or 2 of our program creation, and that was for Buy Local Lincoln County. And those are the only 2 applicants that we have had.
The other question I would have in this category, I'm concerned that this economic development toolkit also provide a fund, and so this may be where it is, that we can partner with other entities, where it may be a $1,000 contribution or a couple thousand, but just when there's a bigger pooling, regional wide, or I guess I'm thinking of some of the marine incentives that are going on to find marine-oriented jobs and skills that we could partner with. Would this be a place for that, where some small funds would come out of?
Yeah, I think we can take a look at the program objective for this and see if we can, if we need to change the language, or if we can somehow make it a little bit broader to address partnership funding for certain activities. Like, for example, the last couple of budget years, we did assist the North Lincoln Hospital Foundation as they needed their fixtures, furnishings, and equipment for their new facility. So that if we had taken a look at this program, that could have been something that could have worked for that. I mean, we took that request and proposal in just on a case-by-case sort of a situation, and that's how we've been doing it. And partly that's helped us gauge what the demand is for these kinds of programs. But yes, we should just take a look at that and see if maybe the language can be expanded to include partnership or leveraging of funding with other organizations. Mm-hmm. And it may be sufficient as it is, but we hadn't looked at it with that lens.
Okay.
But
Deanna, you had a question?
I do. Can we go to the next slide? And actually this might be something similar to what Dick was just saying, but for the City of Grants Pass, and the city provides matching grant funds for building facade grant program. So it's just being able to match funding from other sources, which makes me have this think about this question, and I'm not even sure it's appropriate, but because we're talking about our city economic development as well as urban renewal economic development, would there be an opportunity to join those two as matching funds? I mean, that's, I'm not sure if that's appropriate, but I'm just trying to be creative here and trying to think of all the different type of matching grants and funding that we could do to actually increase the funding available for this City of Grants Pass the facade grant program, but we could look at it in other ways too.
So, Deanna, just the question I would have from your question, are you thinking that there are two, theoretically, hypothetically, there could be two funds, one a city economic development fund and the other being the urban renewal district, and if a project or a request came in for something within the urban renewal district, that both funds could go to that request? Is that what you were thinking?
Yes, if it hits the high mark of city priorities, urban renewal priorities, and goals, yes, I think there might be an opportunity for that in the future.
So I don't see anything that would preclude that. Jody or Allison, do you? Or
so if we are deciding to leverage city and urban renewal funding together, then that would be something to do. Would that be with, I guess going back to the original question, would that be for this local program support grant, or would this be something that you would want to do for future or new economic development tools? For example, the residential programs, could that be grant funding rather than a loan?
So I think Yeah, that probably raises the question of this would be an overriding policy or something for all individual tools. Is that allowed? And then on a case-by-case basis, it being decided.
Mm-hmm. It might make both funds stretch further. It might make them more attractive for maybe a bigger type of a project than otherwise would have been thought of. And of course, we would want to include the COG as checking out all the potential applicants. But
other questions, thoughts? Yes. Oh, well, you got to raise your hand, Judy, on the machine.
Oh, come on. Holy crap. All right.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Now you made me lose my thought.
Oh.
When you're talking about grant loans, and then you were talking about extending it to partnerships like the Marine Center, the Marine Lab, and then we also in number 2 there, you're talking about nonprofits. Is number 1 already inclusive of nonprofits or not? Or why does nonprofit come up in number 2? I mean, are we inclusive of nonprofits currently or not in the grant funding?
Yes, we have funded nonprofits through our loan program and through our grant program.
Okay.
But the question is exclusively?
Well, the local program support grant with the Small Business Development Center, which has been our main grant recipient, they are a nonprofit. I don't think that we would exclude for-profit entities. We just would need to make sure that the objective is being achieved, and that would be providing business assistance or economic development assistance for businesses. So I think the question really about for-profit and nonprofit, for example, the Small Business Administration funding is not available to nonprofits. So in some cases, that's an advantage for our programs because we don't have to limit it. But at the same time, there are tax implications for some nonprofits that can be tax exempt or have a portion of what they do tax exempt. So since we're talking about public money, we just want to be mindful about when we're talking about programs and who the possible applicants can be, that we are calling out at least considering the conversation about should we restrict it or not restrict it.
Okay.
So far, we have not made any restrictions.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. So I heard them stay with what we've got going now.
Yes, that's what I hear as well. And again, we can revisit this question at the end of these 12 questions when we go to the downtown manager grant program. And again, that's obviously a grant program. It's in the name. So we can talk about whether or not we want to extend grant funding to that as well.
All right.
I'll move on to question 5. Should we determine a maximum funding amount or rather let the applicant make the request for consideration? So for example, what we've done in the past, we do have for the energy efficiency loan program, there is a maximum amount that has been determined. So we have our example, Joe's Candy Shop. They're looking to upgrade their HVAC and lighting for 2 stores. So they have their store in their production building and they're wanting to expand their business. So if they're applying for the energy efficiency loan program, how that tool currently reads is multiple loans for multiple properties having the same owner are available. so long as the total loan amounts do not exceed $150,000, and that's $75,000 maximum per property per fiscal year. So this loan may be combined with other urban renewal or city economic development loans, given the total loan amounts remain under $75,000 in 1 year. So this property owner that wants to upgrade their HVAC system for 2 different buildings can apply for $75,000 for each tool. So they would maximum amount be eligible given the program criteria for $150,000. So that's an example of the funding limit that we've used so far. So options going forward is to option 1, do not set a funding limit per applicant and make available on a first come first served basis as funds are available. Option 2 would be to determine a maximum dollar amount that the applicant may be eligible for. And that's what we've done for existing tools. And then option 3 would be determine a maximum percentage of the total project cost that the applicant may be eligible for. So again, we've oh, yes.
I would add a 4th option to discuss in this. Many government funding programs include a leveraging provision. How much is the funding that's coming from the governmental organization, or how much is it leveraged by private investments as well? So, for example, if somebody was coming in and they were saying, "I want $150,000 of a $500,000 loan," and they're using that leverage in order to get the other $350,000, we may want to give more weight to that than we would if they were just saying, "I'm getting it all from you."
Good point. Yeah. Judy, your hand is up. Are you okay? Comments? So right now we have it with a determined, we have a maximum dollar amount per borrower.
Correct, and that's per borrower, not necessarily per property, as we saw with the energy efficiency loan program. That's an applicant may apply for 2 loans, possibly on different properties, as long as they don't exceed that $150,000 limit.
But as I recall early on, I think back in the old days when we first started with these loans, we didn't have a limit per borrower, and we found 1 or 2 borrowers were using up all the funds. So I think it is important to have some kind of limit per borrower.
Yeah, and that's kind of the question here is if one applicant comes in and wants to apply for multiple programs, what's really the cutoff, or do we want to set a cutoff if that applicant is meeting program or overall city and urban renewal goals?
Thoughts? Okay. Deanna?
I just wanted to second what Ron just suggested. I think leveraging funds is really a big, at least for me, I think that's a wonderful opportunity for whatever project comes our way. And I do like limiting the funds as we're doing now and being able to combine funds to get there.
I agree with Diana.
I think it's good to limit funds so there's not some kind of a monopoly going on.
So at the time being, I would say just stay as we are.
but maybe with an eye toward the leveraging.
Yeah.
Yeah, so stay with option 2, but lean towards the option 4 that Mr. Chandler mentioned for future programs.
Right.
Okay. So we can go ahead and move on to question 6. So that question was more about the overall dollar amount that we want to set a limit on. And then this question is more, can a business or property owner apply for multiple programs? And if so, for how much and under what circumstances? So this is the same example of Joe's Candy Shop. If this applicant is looking to do the business expansion program, they want to upgrade their HVAC system, and they are also looking to improve the facade at the same time. The way that the programs are set up now, they can apply for that maximum amount for energy efficiency, the maximum amount for facade improvement, and the maximum amount for the business expansion. That would be $300,000 if they reach the maximum on all of those levels. So if we determine a maximum amount per program, do we determine a maximum program? If that wording makes sense.
Yeah, I guess I'm concerned about one borrower having extensive amount of debt with us that uses all our funding capital. So I'm of the opinion that we would have a maximum borrowing, total maximum borrowing limit per borrower.
So you would lean towards the option 1 is that the applicant would receive funding through multiple city or urban renewal active programs. So for example, if an applicant wants to improve their facade and also upgrade their HVAC system, would they need to pick and choose between which project the city and urban renewal would fund, or would each program reduce its amount of that tool?
I would say our maximum, if we conclude that our maximum loan limit to a borrower is $150,000, then they would have to, they could still have different uses for the funds, but not to exceed $150,000. Deanna?
I'm not sure about the number 150,000, but I do like the opportunity that they can apply for and jointly get different amounts. And I would think that we would really lean on the COG heavily to find out if they could afford all this leveraging and funds. But I do like the idea of putting a max on it total for the total property.
And you mentioned total for the property or total for the applicant. Let's say the applicant has 5 properties in Lincoln City, and 2 of them they want to work on as improvements, and so they want to apply for, as Jody mentioned, facade improvement and energy efficiency for property A, and facade improvement and energy efficiency for property B. Would you want to, assuming that they have stellar credit and good revenue stream and good history with business practices, and our loan officer with the COG is saying that they have the ability to make those payments, we do want to keep in mind that we have limited funding available. So would you want to keep the program set up as it is now, where someone could apply up to $300,000 if they used business expansion, energy efficiency, and facade improvement? Or would you want to restrict that to 150? Or I know these are complicated questions, but we're just trying to figure out, and we can always guidance language rather than requirement language, so that we can evaluate things on a case-by-case basis. But we do want to make sure that we're not inserting bias and that we have clear program criteria.
I would say, as far as urban renewal goes, when we're trying to do the program goals of blight that anyway, to answer your question, I think it's per property, and the COG will have to sort out the available money, and perhaps it's only 2 properties at a time. And I'm not sure about the funding level. I think that depends on how much overall funding we have in that line item, and how we want to make sure that it's available to more than one property owner.
Rick, you had a comment?
Yeah, and I don't disagree with anything that everybody said so far, but except that, as Allison has said, we don't really get that many applicants. And if we have a good project from a good, healthy applicant who can repay, and we have the money sitting there not doing anything else. So I'm thinking on a case-by-case basis, if it makes sense to give a certain project some more funds because there's a project that's really going to get done and it's a benefit to the city and all that, I think we should be open to the possibility.
Judy, you?
Yes, I officially have my hand up. So when we talk about various programs, should there be some consideration given to like state programs, say energy, other programs are available that they might also apply for in addition to ours? I mean, could that be like something on the application, other sources you've applied to in addition to ours, or not, or just a thought? But we're not the only source that they're applying to for specific programs.
So, Councilor Casper, are you curious about what other funding sources are going into the project, or what other funding sources they've tried to get?
They've tried.
Okay.
We're not the only bank.
Yeah, and then we can also just want to mention with Energy Trust of Oregon, when we created the energy efficiency loan program, we did work closely with Energy Trust of Oregon, and we set the program up so that we are not creating a double dip scenario for the applicant. So we require communication with Energy Trust so that we know what the project is, we know what the incentive is, like let's say for a walk-in cooler, and then the loan that we provide is really just a gap to make that project happen at the equipment purchase that is the higher energy efficiency in order to get the incentive. So we're not paying them the incentive. The Energy Trust is providing that incentive to them, and then we just pay that difference again to make that equipment purchase happen.
Okay, thank you.
But I guess I'm still leaning towards the borrower rather than property. We've already kind of leaning towards first come, first serve. And so, Councilor Mark, my concern is that someone swoops in day one and uses up or grabs all the funding. And your point's a good one, that we don't know what the application rate might be. So maybe, I don't know how we keep some kind of time frame or something in mind that, to your point, if a guy has a great projects on multiple buildings, we go with our first run of limiting, but have the flexibility after 6 months or a year or something that could make an exception and come back to that borrower and expand the availability, because it is going to have a wider impact. But I just hate the idea of one person being able to suck up a limited supply of capital to loan. Deanna?
I just have a response to that. I would agree with you with the exception of, and I don't know who owns what property, but if there were like a half a block or even a block worth of property that is owned by one person, but they're each individual businesses or properties, and if they have the wherewithal and want to improve that entire block and perhaps bring in some more family wage businesses, I would be for that.
Judy, are you still? Your hand's up? And you're muted. Okay.
It's way too much trick here. This is commercial, right? Because I do have a different question. This is commercial only, right?
This commercial and residential. The way you answer this question could vary versus between the two, but we are talking about all tools.
Okay.
So that's a good point. I'm glad you brought that up because this question could definitely be answered in two different ways.
Okay, well this, I don't know where to insert this, but it's a project I would consider we should like sort of have on our radar somewhere. But I think you're talking about projects and I'm looking at the tsunami zone. And suppose we have the most vulnerable people down there by Schooner Creek Bridge, and it's that mobile home park, I believe. And suppose we were to have some type of relocation program for those vulnerable people. Would that be any kind of a project if someone wanted to undertake it that could apply for these funds, or is that just way out of the ballpark and it's private partnership somewhere else? But that was my concern if we have that in any scope of our radar.
I think it would depend on who the applicant is. If the applicant is a nonprofit that is maybe through a housing authority, or the applicant is the property owner because they recognize that there might be a higher and better and different use than how the housing is set up now. I think it would just depend on who the applicant is. I think that's a great project idea in general as we talk about redevelopment. There might be a different use for different properties based on different characteristics. One you mentioned being if the property is in the tsunami evacuation zone. And so we can give that specific type of a program some thought. But I do think it would be through the residential programs or like infrastructure partners. If there were some property identified and someone wanted to build housing and then relocate existing tenants off of a different property, infrastructure partners could be one type of a tool that we have in our toolbox where that could be applied for from that property owner. So I think there are ways to implement that type of a program or that type of a project objective. It just depends on who the lead would be for that type of a project.
Okay, that's just something in my head, nobody else's.
But Jody, I think what I've heard is the applicant may be eligible for funding through multiple city URA economic programs dependent on meeting program criteria and needs of the city. Is kind of what I'm sensing. Is that what you're hearing?
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
Before Jody answers that, let me throw out one thought on this. As in all of this, the funding of it is going to be the key. How much money are you going to be able to put into this? What I've seen as far as what we've done over the last few years is that housing will gobble this up quicker than business development. So one suggestion that I would make is that if you want to allow these applications to be for both business development and housing development, you separate and have two separate funds or amounts of money for that, and say this is the amount that's going to go to housing, this is the amount that's going to go to business. Otherwise, you have the potential of getting it all gobbled up in one category and not having funding somewhere else.
That's a good point, but I'm wondering, Ron, if our council goals and stuff is housing, for the time being, maybe that's where we need to also put, our emphasis on these kind of economic development funds.
Sure.
But you make a good point.
Okay.
So, how about a operational check here? We've gone an hour and a half. I don't know what our time frame on this work session is, but we've only done half the questions, Jody. Are we looking at 2 hours, or where are we stopping?
The meeting was originally scheduled until 1.
Oh.
We don't necessarily need to, that's 4 hours. We don't need to take up all that time.
Okay.
We do want to get through these questions though, because really developing future tools is kind of dependent on how you all answer these.
Okay. Well, let's move ahead on these questions and then see how the time and patience of the counseling agency is.
Sounds good. So like you said, I'm hearing more option 3 is making funding available through multiple programs dependent on the specific program criteria. Is that correct?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, question 7 is if a business or property owner is located within the urban rural area, can they apply for city funding, or will that applicant be limited by urban renewal funds? So there's really 2 ways to answer this. Either they submit the standard application that we've made, and then staff will then look at that application and decide if that applicant will go forward to the city loan and grant committee or the urban renewal loan and grant committee, dependent on the applicant's location and also the funds available. So that would be staff's recommendation. And then option 2 would just be to say that if you are in the urban renewal district, you may only apply for urban renewal funds and city funding would not be applicable. And the reason staff would say option number 1 is, first of all, it's more user-friendly because a lot of times people can get caught up in, am I in the urban renewal district or not? And if it's more of staff and the loan and grant committee's decision, it kind of takes that confusing part out of it. And the second thing is it really, urban renewal funds can only be used for capital projects. So it kind of lets the committee and staff decide, is urban renewal funding even eligible for that specific project?
Okay. Deanna, you had a question?
I do. First of all, I agree with number 1. Secondly, I think in our earlier discussion, we thought we would think about whether or not to be able to leverage both funds if it hits a high mark on the priorities or goals of either the city or urban renewal. And so at some point, some project may actually be really high ranking for both funds. And so maybe depending on funds available, a 50-50, 50 from one entity and 50 from the other to cover the costs. And I don't know how complicated that would be to manage, but I would think we want as many manageable opportunities as we can make.
I would agree. Anybody have a counter opinion on that kind of flexibility?
I agree. I think the more flexible, the better.
Okay. All right. That's easy, Jody. Good job.
Great. Moving right along. Question number 8, this is not going to be as easy to answer, but we've kind of already started to talk about it, is should we consider jobs retained or created as part of some program criteria? And then if we do, what kind of jobs? So a little bit about what we have done with our existing programs. We have the Business Expansion Loan Program, and that has the criteria for loans of over $50,000. The applicant must show evidence that the business expansion loan will create a high probability of adding or retaining staff. And from there, it doesn't specify how much that needs to be, how much staff needs to be increased, or what kind of wages are being created, but there is that base level requirement. And then we also have the existing enterprise zone, which has its own state requirements. So options when we're looking at how to evaluate job creation, number 1 is don't consider jobs created or retained as program criteria, and really let the businesses determine the wages, and assume that if you're supporting the business, they'll be able to support staff. Option number 2 would be to use a tiered funding level for jobs created. So for example, loan $20,000 for every 1 job created, or a different amount depending on whatever that program is. And then the third option would be to, again, use tiered funding levels, but instead of looking at number of jobs created, looking at the actual wage. So a lower amount of funding would be for maybe a minimum wage job, and then higher level wages would be for the upper tiers of that loan amount. And so staff's recommendation here would be to use a tiered funding level for either a job created or wage levels. And that question really is more of a policy question about, are you interested in just creating more jobs, or do we want to see a specific type of job increase?
Well, I think it's been stated earlier that we were interested in living wage jobs. So I think that's a component that I would want emphasis on. Deanna?
I would say that I agree with staff number 2 and number 3, and I am not in favor of the enterprise zone. I think that's too much work for staff to track. And I'd also like to see the 1-year job retention as a bar. And I have a question. So let's say there is a business that's successful with the loan and also the retention. And where do those people live who are in those jobs? I would suggest that they live within some distance of the city, not, if they live in another city and just fly in here for a few hours or a few days and then leave again, I don't think that's the type of employee that really fits with our loan program. But so I'd want some consideration given toward where the employee lives.
Okay. Councilor Mark?
Yeah, thanks. And I might be jumbling a couple different programs in my head, so maybe this question isn't relevant, but just to check there are projects that we might give loans to that aren't really connected, that are connected to like a facade improvement, or somebody wants to put solar panels a sustainability type thing that might not have a direct link to another job, but it's still a worthwhile program? Or does that fall into a different category? I might be mixing that up.
Well, that's a great question, but this would be more of a general question. So for programs that have a job creation goal, what would that criteria be for that program? So like you're saying, for facade improvement, job creation is it's not a goal of that program, so we wouldn't really look at jobs. So this would be more for business expansion, I'm trying to think of the other programs that have job creation, but I think that's a good question. Mm-hmm.
Judy, you have to take yourself off mute. Judy, you're not off mute. You're still on mute.
Okay, got it. I need a secretary. Councilor Hinch mentioned something about retaining jobs living jobs in our, anyway, living in the city and working here. That's kind of hard to mandate, I think, because we were just previously talking about regional program expansion to maybe the Marine Lab or whatever as a regional area. And I believe like in labor contracts that have been done in previous areas, ours too, that you can't limit where people live. So that's just something to consider. We're a big area. I mean, I know it's desirable. So I don't know about that one. But anyway, it's up for discussion. And the other issue is these toolboxes are not for now. They're for in the future, right?
Well, future being as soon as we fund them.
Okay, well, I have an idea, and I don't know where it goes, but you talk about business expansion loans, and it seems to me that we have a lot of businesses in our area that need assistance right now, and they have had jobs, they've had workers, and what they're facing are commercial leases and mortgages that are due, and I don't know how to create some kind of assistance during this time, but it seems to be something that's important regarding business expansion, because if there's no business after this virus, there's no loan or money to be given out. So I think it's to our advantage to help retain the businesses that are currently in trouble.
Yeah, if I can, for clarification, much like the geography that we were talking about in the Taft School District, my comment on the Marine was not the Marine Center or Marine a port someplace, but in fact there's an attempt on the coast to generate and explore job creations that are marine oriented. And so I think part of our criteria would have to be, if we put hypothetically $1,000 into a $100,000 partnership, Lincoln City needs to be seeing a benefit to that proportion.
Okay. That wasn't clear to me, Dick.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
So the same game has to play. I think our funds, whether it's city or urban renewal, has to either be in that district or in the city proper, city limit.
All right.
Just to get that in.
Okay.
Deanna, you had a question?
Well, not a question, just a comment to Judy, which is my thinking about where the employees live and within a boundary, I think does lend itself to our funding sources. If we say the Taft School District or a radius of 50 miles or whatever, whatever we determine would be a good place for people to live and work in Lincoln City. I think that's what we should do. I wouldn't want somebody to have a job and anyway, what I'm trying to do is a disincentive, let's say, look at it backwards, a disincentive for people who live in other cities and want to take advantage of these funds and bring people in from somewhere else and have that count towards an employed person, when in fact there are a number of people around here that could use jobs. That's all.
I guess the concern I have is around this whole retainage, job retainage, and Deanna brought up a good point of a year after or whatever, and I'm thinking out loud again with our single-family housing arena. We require landscaping to be put in as the house gets built or finished, but that doesn't mean 6 months from the completion date that the landscaping is alive and growing and there's no repercussions to it going away. And we're not going to, how are we going to call a loan or get repaid on a job retention loan, so to speak, that the jobs go away in like 6 months, a year? That to me is a real tough one, and we see that all the time with other municipalities that do tax deferral or forgiveness, and they never get the benefit back. So I'm just wondering, is this really it sounds good, but how viable is this?
Mayor, it's easier to do on a tax basis because then you have an ongoing amount of funds that are coming to them, and generally what you're looking at is when you say job retentions, it's the percentage of jobs that are paying a certain wage, okay, and that's what you're doing. When you're talking about a one-time loan that's going to get repaid, it becomes much more difficult because you've already given the money out to them. It's much easier when there's an ongoing benefit that's coming to them year after year.
Yeah. So Ron, are you suggesting that this probably isn't a good tool, or?
No, I think it's a good tool. I think that for this criteria may become difficult because you're faced with, the only repercussions you have for somebody who does not keep the jobs or the job wages is to call in the loan. Mm-hmm. That's much more difficult than continuing to provide money year after year in some type of a tax break. Mm-hmm. So I guess all I'm saying is that under a loan program, it just becomes much more difficult to administer.
Mm-hmm. Deanna?
My only response to this is I'd have to think about what Ron said and how that could be applied to this. But my only thought about the retention is that to get a loan, it could be promised that they would hire 3 people at a family wage job and retain them for a year. And there's all kinds of things that could get in their way from not being able to fulfill that. But in a year's time to look back and then they whittled it back to just like 1 employee rather than 3, and that was their intention the whole time, then we've not given the loan, we've not loaned accurately, I guess. But that it's a hard thing to measure. I agree.
Yeah, and I think employment varies. It's really hard to look at a 1-year time frame with employment. And if we're talking about a 10-year loan and a business has successfully retained 10 employees, on average across 10 years. And we're talking about forgiving 10% of that loan because they've made that job retention possible over the term of the loan, then maybe that's something that can be, whatever remainder of their loan can be granted because they have attained a long-term employment at a living wage rate. So I think that there are ways to make sure that we're not just wheeling and dealing on an annual basis and then we have to call back a loan or we have to somehow put a business in jeopardy that's already in jeopardy. If they're decreasing their number of employees, then we don't want to, hit them while they're down if they're already struggling and then we have to call back a loan. So we definitely don't want to set something up where it's doing more harm than good. And I do think, the way that we have things set up now for business expansion loan, we say high probability of retaining or adding staff. So it's a looser language. We are conveying that that's an intention of the program, but it's not necessarily a requirement. It just is for a higher, I think it's $50,000 to $75,000 tier of funding request for business expansion. I think we do have that job requirement. I don't think we say living wage jobs. So we should take a look at that language, but it's just good for us to be talking about this to get a sense of when you want to require something, when you don't, how difficult it might be for staff to track those kinds of things. I mean, we would work with the employment department about how to verify those kinds of things, but we also don't want to make it so challenging that that's all we're doing. The enterprise zone too, I mean, that program exists on its own. And so if we do have a company that comes in and they do have the right sorts of bells and whistles with their employment base that's going to create that enterprise zone opportunity, then that's something they can take advantage of without our program. Or we can offer them some other tools that they can use in addition to them taking advantage of the enterprise zone that we wouldn't have to administer.
I guess all our loans, and we've talked about this, but all our loans right now are zero interest rate. And I think somebody made the comment that by making a zero interest rate loan in a category conceivably helps the business's cash flow. I'm just sensing that we have enough tools that maybe this is one we don't put in there, that we would push them towards another type of one of our loans because we're talking about an operational loan, and there's just so many wild cards in that kind of a loan underwriting and criteria that we could push them towards one of our other loan types that might help their cash flow, which would provide them with their more operational dollars. Judy?
Am I unmuted?
Yep, you're okay.
Okay. I'm for not including it as well. I think there's just too many variables and it could be very cumbersome and time consuming, and I think we could utilize funds elsewhere. That's my thought.
Anybody else?
Oh, here. Go ahead. We're clicking the wrong thing here. I don't like the idea of, you qualify for a loan if you keep the job for a year, and then what do we do if the job goes away? But I did think that Allison's thought about some loan forgiveness after the fact. That sort of interested me. I mean, if someone proves that they kept the job, do they get some reward? But I don't know how you make that work. So.
Well, we're going to have limited funds, and that's the other thing I'm thinking about is what are the top kind of tools that we can have on the table rather than everything?
So it sounds like where we're talking about funding for businesses, that if we put in some language about, again, with the loan forgiveness, if we talk about loan forgiveness toward the end of a loan payment term, and that could include things such as jobs created and retained over the duration of the loan term. So that could be something, if we do find ourselves in a situation where we have a lot of people applying for the same loan, that we would be able to then incorporate that as a criteria to help determine which loan should be issued.
Yes.
I could do that.
Okay, great. And an example that from another city that I thought was interesting, I talked to someone from the city of Grants Pass, and they kind of had a similar question of how to measure job creation, and they used to have a grant program that was used tiered funding levels for job creation, but they eventually realized that this was really challenging to track. So that's more of a suggestion and not a requirement now. So they've adopted that program. And so now they focus, their goal is to support the existing businesses rather than having that specific goal of just expanding employment. And then they can leave the employment up to those businesses that they're supporting. So that's something they can do. Okay. Moving on to question 9, is what equity floor should be required on residential and commercial properties, and should they vary? So for existing tools, what Urban Renewal Agency has used is a 30% equity floor for commercial and residential loans. So that would be option 1, is to stick with what has been used in the past. And then option 2 would be to lower the equity floor to industry standards for commercial and residential loans. And if this is the option that would be best fit, staff would then change the existing programs to lower that floor from 30% down to the industry standards. So for commercial properties, that would be a recommended 20% equity minimum. And then for residential properties would be 25%. And these are recommendations from the COG. They've seen as industry standards. So that is what staff would recommend.
So you're saying that our loan would not go into play unless there was 20 or 25% equity? Is that what you're talking about, Jody?
Correct. That would require 20 or 25% depending on commercial or residential. Mm-hmm. And COG recommended using, instead of a requirement, a recommended amount, and then COG would, as they have with the existing tools, they would then look at the financials, but that would just be our recommendation.
So I guess I'm a little surprised that a 75% loan, 25% equity position in residential versus only 20% in a commercial. Those seem to be switched. I would normally be thinking them switched.
Yeah. And we don't have to use those numbers. Those are just suggestions that we heard from the COG.
Deanna.
I have 2 things. I had the same thought you did, Dick. I thought those were inverted.
Yeah.
I have a second comment. I'd really like to, as Urban Renewal Chair, I'd really like to hear from the other members what they're thinking about these, or if they just agree and don't let us know they're agreeing or have an opinion.
You're all muted.
I agree.
So Mitch, you're okay with the conversation so far, and
Yeah.
you'd jump in? Okay. And Diane, are you all right?
Yes, I'm listening a lot and I agree with a lot. You see my head up and down if you're watching. But yeah, for right now, I'm just muting and listening and do agree a lot with what you're saying. So.
And Riley, how about yourself?
I'm in agreement with everything that's happening. I just have children that I'm parenting as well.
Okay, no problem. We don't want to leave you out, so.
Nope, I'm not afraid to speak up.
I know. All right. Judy, is that you?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
There you go. See, I was right on target. Yes, I agree also, and I'm even wondering why we couldn't have 20 for both of them, 20% for both. So, yeah, I agree.
Yeah, we can do anything. I was just surprised that these, as Jody found, that's the standard, and I wouldn't have agreed. I've found commercial and business loans usually have a higher demand for, or higher requirement of equity.
Yeah, and we could do a 20% for both. We could also stick with that 30% floor. It's really your decision, and it could depend on each program. It doesn't have to be across every loan ever.
Yeah.
That's just our recommendation. So am I hearing that you all would favor the 20% equity minimum for commercial and residential?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's easier and it makes more sense.
Okay. Again, this question we've kind of danced around a little bit. But should these economic development programs be used for properties located in a tsunami evacuation zone? And one option would be to allow economic development funding for projects in tsunami evacuation zones. And this wouldn't impact existing programs because there is no language in the existing tools that specifies whether or not they can be used for projects within the evacuation zones or not. Option two, again, straightforward, just don't allow funding for projects in the tsunami evacuation zone. Number three would be to only allow funding for commercial and lodging projects in the tsunami evacuation zone and exclude residential. And then option four would be to only allow economic development funding for residential projects in tsunami evacuation zones, with the stipulation that the residential homes would be located on the second floor or higher.
I'm wondering if another criteria ought to be in there is that, rather than just saying no or yes, that the properties would have to be brought up to some kind of current standard of construction in the tsunami area. And I don't know if that makes sense, but we certainly don't want to. I don't think we want to encourage, especially residential. I'm having trouble thinking of residential or lodging unless it is built to current code construction criteria.
So if a project is triggering that 50% value, then they do have to be brought up to current code. If it's less than that, it doesn't, unless you want to make that a condition.
And I think that's what I'm putting out there. Rick, you have a question?
Oh, I'm just going to express a minority view, and I don't mind if I'm overruled, because what choice do I have? But living in a tsunami zone, you know, I mean, people bought our houses down here thinking that it might not happen here, probably won't happen here soon. And for instance, I was talking to somebody about putting in solar panels. I'm probably not going to go ahead and do that, but I certainly have invested in renovation in my house and increasing the value, and the value has gone up, as so they say, so people tell me. So I don't know. I'm inclined to just say, if someone wants to fix up their property and it's in a tsunami zone, I would personally let them do it. But that's, like I say, I can see the other side to that. So.
Mm-hmm. Deanna, you had a question?
I had a question for our city attorney. Can we limit funding? I mean, I just have an overall question. Is all of this, would all of this stand up? The ideas of, like, number 4, only residential. And overall, I'll stop there. And if Richard Apicello could just chime in, that would make me feel a little better about this.
I don't know if Richard's there.
I'm here.
Oh, okay.
I don't see any problem. There's no discriminatory issue with the criterion. I think they're rational and defensible. So I don't think there's anything wrong with it.
Okay. You know, again, you know, Councilor Mark makes a good point. If people are, in essence, risking their own assets, and that's fine. I'm just sitting here thinking, now we're talking about, in essence, risking or evaluating the risk of public dollars. So, what's our objective? And that's to improve blight or raise value. I just wonder, we don't have to be a lender of all resorts or, for all things. Diane, you had stepped in?
Did. Isn't there, now, I'm not sure, but isn't there a state rule now that says they don't allow funding, or I don't know what it is, funding in tsunami areas? I could be wrong. I thought there was a big thing that came out.
It was we allowed to be able to have development in those areas. We did not do it the other way.
Oh, we did. Okay. I just remember it came up and I didn't remember which way it went. My only concern with developing in a tsunami zone is being up to code. Can we require that they be up to code, or could the project be to get them up to code? That's my only comments.
And that might be a good use or good reason to borrow, is to bring house or residential or commercial up to current construction standards for in a flood or tsunami area. I like that. Rick, you're still there?
Yeah. I'll just add that, I bought this house in 2015, and there was the commercial lender had no concern at all that I'd heard about the fact that I was in a tsunami zone. They gave us a ton of money. And so I don't know why the city standard would be different. I mean, if a house is not up to code, I think that is a good excuse to help them get there. My house, oddly enough, if a few of you have been here, you have to step up 3 or 4 steps to get up to my front door. And then my crawl space is like, I have this tremendous crawl space that I'm thinking of renting out as a man cave. It's about 5 feet deep and dry as a bone down there. And because I have that deep crawl space and the elevation up to my house, my flood insurance is quite a bit less than it would be otherwise. So those things are taken into consideration. I don't know, we all live down here knowing, even if you live at the top of Diana's Hill there up above the waves, you're still running at a risk of suffering from the tsunami that could happen in the next minute or the next 50 years. I just don't see it as a consideration myself. It's, again, I took my risk. So
and I agree with all you're saying. I think again, we, whoever the we are not traditional lenders, and we have to keep that in mind. That's not our, first and primary expertise, and the COG isn't either. So I think this is one of those areas that I like the idea of assisting businesses or residential properties to come up to current construction standards, in a flood or tsunami area. I can live with that one because that elevates those that are there.
And I think I guess the question for me is, when we're talking about residential projects, we're talking about workforce housing. That might be single family, it might be duplex, it might be multifamily. And do we want to provide tools or incentives for workforce housing in tsunami evacuation zone? I think that is really the crux of the question. So it sounds to me, what I'm hearing, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that you're open to basically letting the market apply for the loan, whether they're in or out of the evacuation zone, assuming that if it is a residential project that meets the criteria that we haven't brought to you yet, for workforce housing projects, that if it's in the tsunami evacuation zone, that it would be required for that to be brought up to code.
Yes. For me, yes, regardless of the 50% rule.
Okay, and part of why workforce housing doesn't work as effectively in the tsunami evacuation zone is because of flood insurance requirements.
Right.
And so a lot of times those projects are just not, they don't pencil. So a lot of times it's not even a project happening because it just doesn't pencil, and so they're not even going to be looking for assistance. Although there are a lot of single family homes that are in tsunami evacuation zones that may be interested in applying for these economic development tools as a way to either rent or sell into the workforce market. And so, if they are, let's just say 1,200 square feet or less, and if they are not a view property that has a higher tax cost, I think that those are more what we're trying to develop is housing for workforce. And generally those are the types of characteristics of housing for workforce. So I think that maybe this is something that we can put in either as a requirement or as something that's desirable Although if we do make it a requirement, it might mean that a person who either is in the workforce now or wants to turn their home into a workforce home may not be able to take advantage of the program because the cost to upgrade might exceed what they're able to pay back over time. So this is something that we can create criteria for, and if we end up getting people interested but not able to make it happen, we can always bring back the criteria and let you know, hey, this is why we're not able to have any applicants that qualify. This is the barrier to being able to use this tool, and then you can reevaluate at that time. I doubt that those kinds of conversations are going to happen within 1 year. So again, this is kind of getting us to a point of knowing where we want to be with criteria as we bring them to you for approval. And then just know that we can always refine things as they go along year after year if we're not getting the type of interest that we thought we would get.
Okay. Diane, you still have your hand up. Do you have a question?
No, I don't.
Okay.
I'm sorry. Lower hand.
Deanna, you do. You're mute.
Okay, now I'm with you.
Yeah, there you go.
I mostly have a comment. If I were ruling the world or just this part of it, I would think that no building within a tsunami zone would be available to folks, regardless of what. But because I don't have that authority, I have to live within the laws and the rules that we have. And I think it was just in the last year's state legislative session that they made building within the tsunami zone appropriate or okay. I feel for you, Rick. I lose sleep over folks that live in Cutler City. I wish I could raise everybody up, 30 feet. And so I have a real resistance to anything within the tsunami zone. But I wouldn't stand in the way of Rick or anybody else trying to find funding to improve their housing, especially. Commercial and lodging, no, I'm not so interested, but residential people do choose where they live, and we all have to think about that.
Okay. Moving on.
All right, thank you. So the next question is very similar, and we might have already answered it, but just going back to something we brought up in the Urban Renewal Agency meeting on the 27th of January. We have received a request for funding for riprap and shoreline stabilization. And is this a type of project that could receive funding through any of these economic development tools? And option one would be to include riprap or shoreline stabilization projects in economic development tools, and this would likely fall under the Infrastructure Partners Program if it would be a eligible project. And I've included the program goal here. So it's for private redevelopment projects that support the efforts of the agency and community vision plans. The agency or city council will partner to construct necessary and required public works infrastructure, such as water, sewer, and storm mainline extensions, also sidewalks, off-street parking, curbs, and gutters. So we could include in that shoreline stabilization as a eligible project. And then the other option would be to say that riprap or shoreline stabilization projects cannot be funded with city or urban renewal funds.
Judy.
Am I talking?
Yep.
Okay. I support number 2, living right here on the coast. I can see the riprap that has been put along the coast and that has not, and it totally erodes on either side of the riprap. And I don't think the city should enter into such a stabilization program. I can look down at Olivia Beach, and they are constantly maintaining their riprap, so I think it would be an ongoing expense that the city does not need to assume.
Well, again, remember, we wouldn't be assuming it. It would be some borrower.
I know, but we'd be giving the money for it.
Right.
Providing money for it.
Yeah. Deanna?
I agree. I say absolutely no, not no.
And Diane?
I agree. No.
Okay.
I disagree.
Yep.
I disagree. I'm in favor for it.
Mm-hmm. You said you're not in favor, Riley?
No, I am in favor of having this be an option for borrowers. In the real estate world, you see the significant differences between houses that have riprap and houses that don't. And if we could facilitate protecting our assets of a tax base, then absolutely. I understand that depending on the growth, what's growing there has a lot to do with it. And if they choose to clear cut it, I don't know if we have a policy in which on the city side, we prevent people from cutting all the trees on oceanfront property or not. But I know that has a significant difference and is extremely detrimental to that embankment when all of everything is removed. And aside from instilling a policy in which you must plant, coastal plants on your ocean-fronted cliff face, I don't know how else better to protect it. I mean, it's only going to erode. So I don't know how to protect that. But, at $100,000, it's going to be a lot of money to put rock on the oceanfront, or whatever that amount is.
So again, as a reminder, this would just be a criteria for a loan, not a city responsibility.
Yeah, I understand that.
Okay, that's what.
Yeah, and I think from our one inquiry, we heard that is about $100,000 to $200,000 for an initial stabilization of riprap, and then maybe $10,000 to $15,000 every 3-ish years. So it is an ongoing expense from this particular inquiry, and so would this be at an initial stabilization project and not ongoing expense, or would this just be we're open to talking about it, again having more specific criteria so that we are treating everyone equally, so that they understand when they can and can't apply, or if your wishes are that this is just too complicated and you'd prefer not to offer public loan funds for this sort of a project. We're open to continued conversation now or later.
No, I don't know.
You have your hand up? Oh, okay. Deanna?
I'll unmute myself this time. I like Judy's explanation of this because I think of it as an environmental impact. And if you put up those barriers on one property, then the results of it undermine the properties on either side. And I'm not sure, and I've asked this question before, and I can't remember the answer, so I'm going to ask it again of our city attorney. Richard, I thought there was something that the state has done, made some determination about riprap, and that we weren't supposed to be doing it. And I remember that in association particularly with the, I think it was Oceanside, where the riprap caused a lot of damage somewhere else, but I could be remembering that wrong.
Okay, I am not aware of any state prohibition on riprap. It's still specifically allowed under our code. I will look to see if the state has done something, but I think riprap is still it's not even the most intense shoreline hardening method. Let me take a look, but I don't think there's any prohibition on it.
You can get back to us later.
So I think at least on the initial run is not to have it as a tool would be a consensus, but Riley raises a point to counter that.
Yeah, I'm hearing not to include it as a tool, but this may be revisited as needed if we want further discussion for a specific project. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. Great. Okay. And then this is actually the last question of the big questions. Should we require upgrades to accessibility in commercial economic development programs, or should we let the planning and building department dictate requirements through permitting? And what we've required in the existing tools for the business expansion and facade improvement loan programs, which both are commercial programs, there's language that says for improvements to real property where not currently available, the plan must meet American with Disabilities Act compliance for accessibility from at least one entrance at street level. And then these two programs, along with energy efficiency loan program, require that before any funds are distributed, the loan applicant must obtain all necessary approvals, including those from Lincoln City Planning and Public Works departments. So one option is to continue to include this language for ADA compliance, which again is for improvements to real property where not currently available, the plan must meet American with Disabilities Act compliance for accessibility from at least one entrance at street level. Or option two would be to remove this language and let the planning and building departments dictate the requirements. And staff would recommend option number one. And while urban renewal and economic development isn't in the business of permitting, having this requirement would really allow us to continue to have that conversation with the applicant. So if they're doing a facade improvement and they're not necessarily thinking about increasing their accessibility or really improving their accessibility, this will let us kind of nudge them in that direction if that's not something that's already on their radar.
Rick, you have a question?
No reason to, obviously we should continue to use the current language and maybe point them to the planning department so that they can see what those requirements are, but I don't know why we would not want to remind them of their responsibility.
Agreed. Deanna?
I agree.
Okay. Any counter arguments? All right. Okay, Jody, you got us through that.
Great. Yeah, were there, before we move on, were there any questions that you all wanted to revisit now that we've gone through the specific criteria? Do we want to go back to the first question or anything that we may have missed?
I don't think so. Do you have any that things that you're unsettled with?
I'm sorry, Mayor, say that again.
Does Jody or Allison have any questions that are unsettled in their mind?
Unless Allison does, I don't have anything, keeping in mind that the specific criteria for these new tools will still bring to you. So taking what we've heard from you all today, if we bring it back in, say the residential tools and you see it as an actual program, we can still talk about it, and we'll be asking for approval for those programs. So either you can say this looks good as it is, or you need staff to revise it and bring it back to another meeting. So I think we have a good sense of direction from what we've heard, unless Allison needs anything else.
No, I agree. I think we have some clarity on direction. Thank you very much.
Good. Are you all right, Ron?
Yes, but I do have one thing to show all of you before you go off the air.
Oh, we're not done yet. We still got the big questions to answer.
Well, I know that, but before you go off the air, I've got something I think will make your day.
Okay. All right. Jody, you want to take us to your downtown manager program, I guess?
Yes, yeah. So again, the specific program questions will be bringing in the future, but the one thing we did want to go through today before we all tune out is the BAMA proposal, which was included in the packet materials sent out. And again, this was something that's been presented from BAMA that Urban Renewal Agency wanted further discussion on. And that would be a bigger discussion about the Downtown Manager Grant Program, which is one of the reasons why we wanted to talk about the approach to grant funding in general. So one option, or do we want to review the BAMA proposal? I guess before I move.
Does everybody recall the BAMA proposal?
I do.
I do.
Okay.
I do.
All right.
Okay, great. So different options for how to respond to that. The Urban Renewal Agency could make further grant funding available for that Downtown Manager program. And keeping in mind, this was originally brought online as a pilot program. And so the BAMA Downtown Manager was funded as that pilot project. So the first option would be to continue that program. Option two would be, rather than continuing a Downtown Manager tool through the Urban Renewal Agency, would be to shift that program to the city funds. So that way it could be used outside of the Urban Renewal District. And if that's the direction that you all go, that would make that application for that funding a competitive process, and it wouldn't be exclusive to BAMA because it would be a citywide tool. The third option would be for the city or Urban Renewal Agency to move forward with exploring this proposal from BAMA. And then option four is to not include a Downtown Manager grant program.
Okay. Deanna.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, okay. Judy.
Are we, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Are we already officially a Main Street project? Have we been accepted for that?
We are at an exploring Main Street level. I believe there's like 3 or 4 different tiers of being in the Oregon Main Street program.
And yeah, there's a new.
Yes. So the city is actually the member of the Oregon Main Streets program, and Jody's right. We're at I think it's the 2nd or 3rd tier, which has different requirements for how you run your program. Having a Downtown Manager tool was years ago partly what we felt was necessary in order to implement Main Streets projects. Economic development staff have attended Main Streets conferences and have taken advantage of workshops, and we have applied for grant assistance in the past for specific projects. not to a great extent, but where we feel we can take advantage of what the Main Street program has to offer. We have continued partnership for the last several years. The Downtown Manager tool was obviously to fund staffing, which is why you see the option number 1 to continue with Urban Renewal as a Downtown Manager grant tool, not recommended. And the reason is because Urban Renewal funds are really meant for capital and not for operations or maintenance. So if it is a tool that you would like to continue to do in some new form or continue as an existing project, that we would recommend that you do that as part of city funding rather than Urban Renewal. But yes, the city is a member of Oregon Main Streets.
Okay, so my question is, it sounds like we're almost creating a new position. Is that correct? In the downtown, by having this tool, we can create a downtown manager position if it's needed for grant writing or whatever is listed, as well as, should we come to the point in the Main Street project, would we utilize this position that's funded from the grant toolbox? I guess.
Yeah, there are lots. Yeah, there are lots of ways to do this. First of all, I think you should decide, do you want to consider creating a Downtown Manager tool again? If the answer is yes, then I think we can bring this back to you with some suggestions, either at work session or at a regular meeting, whether it be for Urban Renewal or for the city. And so, it's definitely something that we can talk about again. I think in the way that we did it in the past, it was a 2-year pilot project for a part-time position, and that was really through BAMA. So BAMA was considered our partnering entity. So what we were trying to do is give BAMA some support for staffing in order to implement projects that fit well with the Oregon Main Streets program. And again, that was in the south half of Lincoln City. So do you want to have either Urban Renewal or the city, or both, consider creating a tool or making a tool available once again? If so, would you like that to be competitive, or do you want to talk exclusively with BAMA with their proposal? And, it's really up, in this situation, we have partnered with the agency, the BAMA, to have this downtown manager. I don't think that we're talking about creating a staff position. We're trying to help implement Oregon Main Street activities through any partnering agency that's in the city.
Thank you.
Anne, you have your hand up?
I do. Am I muted? Yes. I have a question. When we were talking with the BAMA, the downtown manager, we asked for some information, success information. This was a pilot program, and we really wanted to see how successful it was. We know they did some great programs, the Haunted Taft and the Ghost, and I don't know about the bingo. We asked for some numbers back. I haven't seen any of that. Did I miss something? Or because again, a pilot program doesn't always mean it's going to be successful. It means we tried it, it worked. Could it be sustainable? Did the Taft merchants make enough money that they would support this themselves? My understanding in downtown management position is that there's a tax base that they pay for that through their own taxes, and it funds that area. Back in the day when I was looking at doing this, but I'm not sure. So I'm really confused about it, if it's successful or not. Did it do what it was supposed to do? Did it move tourism down there? Did it increase their profits? What did it do besides making great programs, which that's what, Explore Lincoln City does. So I'm confused by it, and I would like some more information because we didn't get the successful numbers. We haven't received anything back.
Right. If I could, again, when this pilot program came into play, we didn't have the economic development department that we now have within the city. This was a pilot, and the part of the criteria of the pilot was, to answer your question, Diane, was those businesses in the area, Taft, Bama, would make that judgment whether it was successful or not by themselves, by willing to extend it, fund it themselves. So, I think let's not be misled by, a lot of good things, but if those businesses directly impacted didn't have or don't have enough results, conclusions, criteria that says it was worth doing, and they don't want to fund it, I think we have no alternative but to do not continue downtown manager program. And I would say it's now we have an economic development department, and to me, we're talking about a budget issue. As a citywide program, which makes more sense, that would be funded by the general fund. So I think if Allison and Ron see it as wanting to put into the budget or proposed budget, that's where we would deal with it as a budget committee and then in city council.
Mr. Mayor,
yes.
In speaking about the budget, I can tell you that this would not be something I would put in, and I would delay it at least, if not more, a year. We're coming into a really uncertain budget right now, and if we wanted to put funds like this towards something, I would put it towards more of the loan programs that will have a direct impact on the businesses. What I've seen that has come out of this program has been very similar to what Explore Lincoln City and what the Chamber has done. And so I do have a big concern about where we're going to be with this year's budget. And even after it's adopted, it's going to be an uncertain budget because of we're right in the middle of business shutdowns and everything else. So this is not one that I would put into the budget at this point in time.
Mm-hmm. Deanna, you have your hand up?
I did. I understand what Ron is saying, and that's, that he's the budget manager. He would know about whether or not we need to fund something like this. I see it an outreach from the city need, whether I think, and whether it's the type of things that were done that Bama did in their part of the city or something, or if that job description would change, so to speak. What are the goals? What are the priorities? If we changed it to a downtown manager or a Main Street manager when we get that designation, I think it would depend on what this position would do before I would consider funding it, because there's a lot of reason for outreach from the city, from urban renewal, from economic development especially. But I would want to see the goals and what we want this position to try and be successful at.
Diane, you still have your hand up? Are you having a question? Nope. Okay. And so I guess what I'm hearing with that, nobody else stepping in, is to table this one?
Yeah, I'm not in support of renewing this position or funding this position.
Okay.
I agree.
I concur too.
Okay. All right. Next steps.
Okay, great. So now that we've heard from you all about more direction on how to develop these criteria. The next step for staff is to create the programs for the pre-development fees and infrastructure partners to bring to City Council and Urban Renewal Agency. Again, those will be brought to each agency separately at the same night, ideally, but separately. And then you all can decide as City Council and Urban Renewal Agency if those programs are really what you want to see or if they need to be altered. And again, those criteria could be different for City Council and Urban Renewal Agency depending on how those funds should be used. And then from there, staff will bring forth the residential tools to City Council and Urban Renewal Agency. And then phase 4 would be the remaining tools as prioritized by City Council and Urban Renewal. And again, the list of all of those programs, I think there's like 25 of them. So those will come sort of in chunks, as it were. So that's what staff is looking to do. So hopefully we can be looking forward to future City Council and Urban Renewal Agency meetings to see the results of this meeting actually come out. So it's exciting.
Yeah, and you have all the time till July, right? To make sure
Correct.
it happens? Okay.
Yeah, and again, the programs are, the funding is limited to public-private partnership projects until May 14th. And so the goal is to get the programs approved and the criteria fleshed out before then. So that way, when that would be available for the city, the programs will be in place.
Okay, great. Any questions? Any questions of Jody or Allison?
I have something. My hand's up.
Yep, it is.
I just wanted to say thank you for the research that you did and how you presented the information. It has made it a lot easier to take in and to think about, and I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay. Ron, you had something you wanted to share with us? As he's on mute.
Rogue hand sanitizer looks like.
Oh, Ron?
Could we ask Jody?
Can't hear you, Ron.
Could we ask Jody to put Ron on phone?
Okay.
How's that?
Rogue has made, is bottling now hand sanitizer.
Oh.
And 80% alcohol, and that's what they are now selling.
Right.
So I thought that was pretty great.
How'd you get that bottle?
Sources.
As counsel, I think it probably is under $25. So
Oh, okay.
I hope so.
Hey, well, you know, I think this whole program today went very well. You know, I'm impressed with everyone's absorption of the training. And so this was a nice kind of dry run for a city council meeting. So I look forward to that.
Council,
Yes.
I did find reference to a ban on riprap for in front of structures, beachfront structures built after January 1977, but I don't have this citation. I'll see if I can find it.
Thank you, Richard. All right. Anything good for the order? Hearing none. Thank you for taking the morning, and Jody and Allison for conducting it. We'll take off. The meeting adjourned.
Good job, Jody and Allison. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Stay